Ancient texts hidden for centuries in desert caves near the Dead Sea have long fascinated scholars and religious historians alike.
Inside the storage jars were ancient texts, which very quickly they came to realize that these were incredibly important.
In 2018, researchers achieved what many thought impossible, decoding one of the last remaining unpublished Dead Sea Scrolls. This breakthrough revealed a mysterious 364-day calendar used by an ancient Jewish sect.
Is the Dead Sea Scrolls?
These are the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this is the place where they were found, and this is why it's so exciting.
Offering a window into religious practices that may have sparked significant conflicts during the Second Temple period. The decoding not only solved a decades-old puzzle, but also transformed our understanding of early Judaism and the complex religious landscape from which modern religious traditions emerged. The story begins in the winter of 1946 to 1947, when a Bedouin shepherd named Mohammed Ed-Dib was searching for a lost goat in the rugged cliffs near Qumran. As he tossed a stone into a cave opening, he heard something unexpected, the sound of pottery breaking. Inside the cave, he discovered clay jars containing ancient leather scrolls wrapped in linen. This accidental discovery would trigger one of the most significant archaeological finds of the 20th century. Word quickly spread about the ancient texts, initiating a frantic search throughout the limestone cliffs bordering the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. Between 1947 and 1956, archaeologists and Bedouins discovered a total of 11 caves containing approximately 900 documents. These fragile manuscripts had survived for roughly 2,000 years in the arid desert climate, protected from moisture that would have otherwise destroyed them. The collection included biblical texts representing nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible except Esther, as well as non-biblical religious writings and sectarian documents. Some texts were nearly intact, while others were fragmented into thousands of pieces, creating a monumental puzzle for researchers. The most complete scrolls were found in Cave 1, including the famous Isaiah scroll, which contains the entire book of Isaiah.
From the book of Isaiah, it says that they're to go into the wilderness to prepare the way of God,
and is one of the oldest complete biblical texts ever discovered. The scrolls were written primarily in Hebrew, with some in Aramaic and a few in Greek. The materials varied from parchment made of animal skin to papyrus, and even one unique copper scroll that listed hidden treasures, which, despite numerous expeditions, have never been found. The significance of these texts cannot be overstated. Before their discovery, the oldest Hebrew biblical manuscripts dated from the 9th century CE, the Dead Sea Scrolls, pushed this timeline back by roughly a millennium, with some fragments dating as far back as the 3rd century BCE. This massive leap backward in time allowed scholars to verify the reliability of later biblical texts and to track subtle evolutions in language, theology, and scribal practices. Who created these extraordinary texts, and why were they hidden in desert caves? The evidence points to a Jewish sect known as the Essenes, a group described by ancient historians like Josephus and Philo as strict adherents to ritual purity and communal living. The ruins at Qumran, located near where the scrolls were found, show signs of a structured community with spaces for communal meals, ritual baths for purification, and what appears to be a scriptorium where scribes may have copied and composed texts. The Essenes weren't just another religious group, they represented a radical departure from mainstream Judaism centered on the temple in Jerusalem. Living in the harsh desert environment of Qumran between approximately 150 BCE and 68 CE, they established what they believed was the true practice of Judaism, rejecting what they saw as corruption in Jerusalem's religious leadership. Archaeological evidence from Qumran reveals a highly organized community with distinctive features. Multiple ritual baths, mikvot, indicate their emphasis on purity. A large hall likely served as a dining area where communal meals were shared. Pottery workshops, agricultural areas, and water management systems demonstrate their self-sufficiency in the challenging desert environment. The scrolls themselves provide insight into daily life at Qumran. The community rule scroll outlines a rigorous schedule of prayer, work, and study. New members underwent a 3-year probationary period before full acceptance into the community. property was held in common, meals were eaten together, and celibacy was practiced by at least some members. Each day included intense study of sacred texts and ritual purification. But why would this community separate itself from mainstream Judaism? The answer may lie partly in ideology and partly in politics. The Essenes believed that the priesthood in Jerusalem had become corrupt and that the temple rituals were being performed incorrectly. They saw themselves as the sons of light engaged in a cosmic battle against the sons of darkness, those who followed the corrupt temple leadership. Beyond these spiritual concerns, there were practical disputes. The Essenes adhered to a solar calendar of 364 days, while the temple authorities followed a lunar calendar. This meant that holy days were celebrated on different dates, a profound religious division that made unified worship impossible. The Essenes also had distinctive theological views. They held a deterministic outlook, believing that God had predetermined who would be saved. They practiced a form of dualism that saw the world as caught in a struggle between good and evil forces. Their writings contain apocalyptic visions of the end times and the coming of one or more Messiah figures who would restore righteous leadership. For decades, one particularly challenging scroll remained stubbornly resistant to decoding efforts. Consisting of 60 tiny fragments, some no larger than a fingernail, this text had stumped generations of scholars. The fragments, covered in an unusual encrypted Hebrew script, presented a double challenge. Not only were the physical pieces difficult to arrange, but the content itself was deliberately encoded. In 2018, researchers Eshbel Ratson and Jonathan Ben-Dov from the University of Haifa announced a breakthrough that sent ripples through the academic community. After a painstaking year of work, they had successfully reconstructed and deciphered this enigmatic scroll. Every day we were discovering something new, Ratson explained in an interview after their findings were published in the Journal of Biblical Literature. There were many moments of excitement when we realized what was written. Their success came through a combination of traditional scholarship and innovative approaches. Initially, the team gathered high-resolution digital images of all 60 fragments. Using specialized software, they analyzed the texture, color, and handwriting patterns of each piece. This digital analysis allowed them to identify fragments that likely belong together based on physical characteristics. But the real challenge came from the encryption itself. The text used a substitution cipher where certain words were replaced with coded symbols or alternative characters. Rather than being motivated by security concerns, this encryption appears to have been primarily symbolic, a way of conveying prestige and authority to the calendar information contained within. The breakthrough came when Ratson noticed that certain repeating patterns in the text corresponded to months and seasons. By identifying these patterns and comparing them with known calendar systems from the Second Temple period, the team began to decipher the code. Small victories led to larger insights as they gradually pieced together the puzzle. It was like solving a complex jigsaw where you're not sure what the final picture should look like. Ben-Dov noted, "Each fragment we placed gave us clues about where others might fit." Another critical discovery came when the researchers identified editorial corrections made by a second scribe. These corrections, written in the margins, provided additional context that helped clarify difficult passages. The original scribe had apparently made several errors in the calendar calculations, which were later corrected by a reviewer who added missing dates. The reconstruction process wasn't linear. It involved constant reevaluation and repositioning of fragments as new information emerged. Some pieces that were initially thought to belong to separate texts were revealed to be part of the same document. Others that seemed unrelated showed connections through content analysis. As the scroll gradually took shape, the researchers realized they were looking at something extraordinary. One of the most complete descriptions of the sectarian calendar system from Qumran. This wasn't just any calendar, it was a document that likely underpinned the entire religious life of the community. The decoded scroll consisted of several sheets of parchment that would have been sewn together to form a continuous text. The writing was in a distinctive style characteristic of texts from the late 1st century BCE, a period of intense religious ferment in Judea. After a year of dedicated work, what had once been a collection of disconnected fragments became a coherent text that offered unprecedented insights into the religious practices of the Qumran community. the Decoded scroll unveiled something remarkable: a 364-day calendar that perfectly divided the year into exactly 52 weeks. Unlike the lunar calendar used by the Jerusalem temple authorities, which required periodic adjustments to align with the seasons, this calendar was unchanging. Its mathematical precision was no accident. For the Qumran community, it represented divine perfection. The number 364 was deeply significant, explains Dead Sea Scrolls scholar James Vanderkam. It's divisible by 7, meaning every date would fall on the same day of the week year after year. This regularity reflected what they saw as the unchanging order established by God at creation. The scroll revealed that the year was divided into 4 seasons of 91 days each, 13 weeks, with each season containing 3 months. The first 2 months of each season had 30 days, while the third had 31. This structure ensured perfect symmetry throughout the year. Fascinatingly, the calendar always began on a Wednesday, the 4th day of creation according to Genesis, when God created the sun, moon, and stars. This wasn't arbitrary. It reflected the community's interpretation of creation as the foundational moment for establishing time itself. By starting their year on the day when the celestial timekeepers were created, they aligned their calendar with what they believed was God's original design. The scroll employed the Hebrew term tekufa, meaning period or cycle, to mark the transition between seasons. These special days marked the equinoxes and solstices, the astronomical turning points of the year. The scroll provided precise instructions for observing these transition days, which carried special religious significance. Unlike our modern calendar with its irregular month lengths, the Qumran calendar offered elegant predictability. Every holiday would fall on the same day of the week, every year. Passover always began on Tuesday evening. The Day of Atonement was always on a Friday. This consistency eliminated any uncertainty about when to observe sacred times. For a community that viewed time itself as sacred, this predictability wasn't merely convenient, it was theologically essential. The scroll describes the calendar as the perfect way and suggests that following any other system would lead to impurity and religious error. What makes this calendar particularly striking is how it differs from other timekeeping systems of the period. The standard Jewish calendar followed lunar months of 29 or 30 days, requiring an additional month approximately every 3 years to keep seasonal festivals aligned with their agricultural purposes. The Roman calendar of the period, while solar-based, had irregular month lengths and required periodic adjustments. The Qumran calendar, by contrast, represented an idealized system that sacrificed strict astronomical accuracy for theological perfection. Though it fell short of the actual solar year by about 1.25 days, this discrepancy seems to have been less important to the community than maintaining the symbolic integrity of their system. The Decoded scroll also revealed something unexpected: detailed instructions for intercalation, the process of adding days to align the calendar with the actual solar year. This suggests that despite their focus on perfection, the Qumran community recognized the practical need to occasionally adjust their system. These adjustments, however, were integrated into their theological framework rather than being seen as compromises to it. One of the most intriguing revelations from the Decoded scroll was the inclusion of festivals not mentioned in the traditional biblical texts. Among these were the Festival of New Wine and the Festival of New Oil, celebrations that extended the harvest-related observances beyond what was practiced in mainstream Judaism. These festivals created a rhythm of sacred time tied closely to agricultural cycles. The Festival of New Wine occurred 50 days after the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, while the Festival of New Oil followed 50 days after that. This created a structured progression through the summer months that sanctified each major harvest. These weren't just agricultural celebrations, notes Dead Sea Scrolls expert Eileen Schuller. They were theological statements about God's provision and the community's ritual purity. By consecrating the first fruits of wine and oil, they ensured that all subsequent use of these products remained pure. The scroll provides detailed instructions for these festivals, including specific prayers, offerings, and ritual practices. During the Festival of New Wine, for instance, community members would bring their first pressed wine to be blessed before it could be used for the remainder of the year. Similar rituals surrounded the olive harvest and oil production. Beyond these agricultural festivals, the scroll also revealed distinctive observances of traditional biblical holidays. Passover, for example, included additional purification rituals not described in biblical texts. The Day of Atonement was preceded by special preparatory days that extended the period of repentance. The community's approach to the Sabbath was particularly strict. The scroll outlines prohibitions far more extensive than those observed by other Jewish groups, including restrictions on speaking about work, planning future activities, or even rescuing an animal that had fallen into a pit. For the Qumran community, perfect Sabbath observance was essential to maintaining their covenant relationship with God. Prayer times were precisely scheduled according to the movements of the sun. The scroll describes specific prayers for sunrise, midday, and sunset with additional observances at midnight. These weren't merely suggested times but religious obligations that structured the entire community's daily routine. Particularly fascinating are the purification rituals described in the scroll. Community members underwent frequent immersions in ritual baths, mikvaot.
These were stepped pools used for ritual purification. You would walk down the steps and immerse yourself in a basin at the deepest point.
That have been discovered through archaeological excavations at Qumran. The scroll provides previously unknown details about when and how these immersions should occur. The text also reveals a hierarchical structure to community worship. Different ranks of members had different roles in religious ceremonies, with higher-ranking members leading prayers and lower-ranking ones responding. This structured approach extended to meals, which were communal affairs, preceded by blessings and consumed in order of rank. Beyond the calendar system itself, the Decoded scroll revealed something equally valuable to researchers, evidence of an active scholarly process. The text shows clear signs of editing, with a second scribe adding corrections and clarifications to the original writing. These annotations provide a rare window into the intellectual practices of the Qumran community. The corrections appear in the margins of the text, written in a different handwriting style than the main content. In several instances, the second scribe added dates that had been omitted by the original writer. In others, calculations were corrected or clarified. This suggests a review process where texts were carefully checked for accuracy before being finalized. What we're seeing is essentially peer review from 2,000 years ago, explains paleographer Ada Yardeni. It demonstrates that these texts weren't the product of isolated scholars working alone, but of a community engaged in careful, collaborative work. The corrections also reveal something about the community's approach to textual authority. Rather than discarding or completely rewriting flawed texts, they preserved the original while adding corrections. This practice suggests a respect for existing documents combined with an ongoing commitment to accuracy and clarity. Intriguingly, some of the annotations appear to reconcile different calendar traditions. In several spots, the second scribe adds alternative ways of marking particular dates, perhaps acknowledging various interpretations within the community or attempting to harmonize their system with older traditions. The scroll also shows evidence of teaching and learning. Certain passages include explanatory notes that appear designed to help readers understand complex calculations. These pedagogical elements suggest the text wasn't just a reference document, but a teaching tool used to pass knowledge to new community members. The collaborative nature of the text challenges earlier views of the Qumran community as rigid and monolithic. Instead, we see evidence of active intellectual engagement, where ideas were proposed, discussed, refined, and sometimes contested. The scroll reveals a community where precision mattered enough that texts were carefully reviewed and corrected rather than simply accepted as written. Physical analysis of the ink and parchment suggests that the corrections were added relatively soon after the original writing rather than decades later. This indicates an active editorial process rather than later historical revisions. The original text and corrections were likely part of the same scholarly project, with different members of the community contributing their expertise. The 364-day calendar wasn't just an academic exercise or a minor sectarian peculiarity. It likely represented a profound religious schism that may have been central to the Qumran community's separation from mainstream Judaism. The Decoded scroll helps us understand why calendar differences could have triggered such dramatic divisions. Imagine the practical implications. While priests in Jerusalem were celebrating Passover, the Qumran community might be observing an ordinary day. When the Qumran group observed Yom Kippur with its strict fasting requirements, those following the temple calendar might be going about their regular activities. These discrepancies made religious unity impossible. Calendar disputes might seem technical to us today, notes historian Sacha Stern, but in ancient Judaism, celebrating festivals on the wrong day would have been considered a serious transgression. It wasn't just about when to observe holidays, it was about who had the authority to determine sacred time. The Jerusalem temple authorities followed a lunar calendar with months beginning at the new moon. This system required periodic adjustments and relied on direct observation of lunar phases. By contrast, the Qumran calendar was fixed and predictable based on mathematical divisions rather than astronomical observations. The scroll reveals the theological dimensions of this dispute. In several passages, it criticizes those who follow the moon and wander from the true path. For the Qumran community, the lunar calendar represented not just a different system, but a fundamental religious error that led to ritual impurity and covenant violations. Archaeological evidence from Qumran supports the idea that calendar conflicts contributed to the community's isolation. The settlement is oriented to track the solstices and equinoxes, with certain buildings aligned to mark these astronomical events. This physical orientation reflects the importance of their solar calendar to daily life. Historical sources from the period describe intense debates about calendar issues among various Jewish groups. The Book of Jubilees, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, strongly advocates for a 364-day calendar and condemns those who follow lunar reckonings. This text may have been particularly important to the Qumran community, providing scriptural justification for their calendar position. The political dimensions of this calendar dispute shouldn't be underestimated. Control of the calendar meant control of religious life. The temple authorities in Jerusalem derived significant power from their role in declaring new months and festival dates. By rejecting this system, the Qumran community was challenging not just a calculation method, but an entire power structure. For individual families, these calendar differences created painful choices. Following the Qumran calendar would mean breaking with the broader Jewish community and becoming unable to participate in temple festivals. This helps explain why the sectarian community remained relatively small despite its conviction that it preserved the true practice of Judaism. The 2018 decoding breakthrough didn't happen in isolation. It built upon decades of technological advances that have revolutionized Dead Sea Scrolls research. Since the early 2000s, new imaging and analytical techniques have allowed scholars to extract information from fragments that were previously considered unreadable. Multispectral imaging has been particularly transformative. This technique photographs scroll fragments using different wavelengths of light, including those invisible to the human eye, revealing text that has faded beyond visual detection. In 2015, researchers using multispectral imaging discovered previously invisible text on what was thought to be a blank piece of parchment from Cave 11, demonstrating how technology continues to expand the corpus of readable material. What looks like an empty fragment to the naked eye can contain entire passages when viewed with the right technology, explains imaging specialist Greg Behrman. It's like having a time machine that lets us recover words that haven't been seen for 2 millennia. DNA analysis has emerged as another powerful tool. In 2020, researchers published findings in the journal Cell showing how genetic testing of parchment fragments can determine which pieces came from the same animal hide. This biological connection helps scholars reunite fragments that belong together, solving parts of the puzzle that textual analysis alone couldn't address. The Israel Antiquities Authority, in partnership with Google, completed a massive digitization project between 2011 and 2016. This initiative created high-resolution images of all scroll fragments and made them freely available online. This democratization of access has allowed scholars worldwide to examine these texts, accelerating research progress through global collaboration. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are now being applied to scroll research. Computer algorithms can analyze handwriting patterns across thousands of fragments, identifying similarities that might indicate the same scribe at work. These tools can process vastly more data than human researchers, finding connections that might otherwise remain hidden. 3D digital modeling has allowed researchers to virtually unroll damaged scrolls that are too fragile to handle physically. In 2016, a severely damaged scroll from Engedi was virtually unrolled using microcomputed tomography, revealing it to contain the earliest known copy of Leviticus. Similar techniques may eventually allow scholars to read scrolls that remain too delicate for traditional analysis. Chemical analysis of ink has provided another avenue for connecting fragments. By identifying the unique chemical signatures of different ink batches, researchers can link texts that were written as part of the same scribal project, even when content doesn't provide clear connections. These technological advances don't replace traditional scholarly methods. Philology, paleography, and historical analysis remain essential. Rather, they provide new data that enhances traditional approaches. The 2018 Decoding combined cutting-edge imaging with painstaking linguistic analysis, demonstrating how modern technology and classical scholarship can work together to unlock ancient mysteries. While the 2018 calendar decoding represented a significant milestone, the story of Dead Sea Scrolls discoveries didn't end there. In March 2021, Israeli archaeologists announced they had found dozens of new scroll fragments in what they called the Cave of Horror near the Dead Sea. These fragments contained a Greek text from the biblical books of Zechariah and Nahum. What makes these newer findings particularly significant is their historical context. Unlike the Qumran scrolls, which were hidden around 68 CE when Roman forces destroyed the community, these fragments were placed in the cave during the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 136 CE, the last Jewish uprising against Roman rule. The cave also contained the skeletal remains of approximately 40 people who had sought refuge there during this rebellion. These refugees brought their most precious possessions with them, explains archaeologist Ofer Sion. The fact that they chose to bring biblical texts shows how central these writings were to their identity, especially during a time of existential threat. The 2021 discoveries weren't limited to scroll fragments. The same expedition recovered a 10,500-year-old basket.
As far as we know, the biggest intact basket, the oldest intact basket that we know of.
Possibly the oldest intact basket ever found. Well-preserved remains of a child wrapped in cloth dating back 6,000 years, and rare coins minted during the Bar Kokhba revolt bearing Jewish symbols. These findings expand the timeline of Dead Sea Scrolls research in important ways. The original Qumran scrolls primarily represent texts used during the late Second Temple period, while these newer discoveries offer a glimpse into which biblical texts remained important to Jewish communities in the immediate aftermath of the temple's destruction in 70 CE. Technological advances were crucial to these new findings. The 2021 expedition used drones equipped with high-resolution cameras to survey previously inaccessible cliff faces, identifying caves that showed signs of human activity. Rappelling equipment allowed archaeologists to reach caves that previous generations of researchers couldn't access safely. In 2022, researchers announced that artificial intelligence analysis of handwriting had identified previously unknown scribes among the Qumran texts, suggesting that the community was larger or more diverse than previously thought. This ongoing research continues to refine our understanding of who produced these texts and under what circumstances. DNA analysis of scroll material has also yielded surprising results. Some parchments appear to have been produced outside the immediate Qumran area, suggesting either trade networks or the movement of manuscripts between different communities with similar beliefs. Climate change has created an unexpected urgency for Dead Sea Scrolls research. As the Dead Sea region experiences increasing aridity, caves that have preserved organic materials for millennia are undergoing environmental changes that could threaten any undiscovered texts. This concern has accelerated survey efforts, with archaeologists racing to locate any remaining scrolls before conditions deteriorate further.